Welcome back, guys. In today's episode, I'm sharing 10 true disturbing stories about creepy encounters during the fall season. Tales remind us that autumn beauty often hides something darker underneath. But before we begin, please consider subscribing. And don't forget to like and share it with your friends. Let me know where you're watching from. Thank you all. Now, let's start. The cemetery sat about 30 minutes outside of town, out past the industrial park where the buildings thinned and the road narrowed into two cracked lanes wrapped in trees, mostly maples. I was the last seasonal hire that year. Everyone else had already finished their hours or moved on once the real cold started creeping in. But I'd asked to stay longer, needed the paycheck, and Hal, the groundskeeper, liked having the help. Hal was one of those guys who looked like he'd been carved out of stone and then left in the sun too long. Gruff voice, big hands, always in the same faded flannel. He walked with a limp, pretty bad one. Something to do with the job injury from way back in the 70s. He never went into detail, and I never pushed. But it meant he couldn't handle stairs or uneven ground anymore, so he stuck to the central and newer plots. I handled the older sections. That morning he handed me a key ring and said, "East Mausoleum's due. Just sweep it out, tighten anything loose, check the locks." The East Mausoleum sat near the back wall, past a cracked footpath and behind a row of overgrown hedges. 5 crypts inside. A rusted iron gate that stuck if you didn't lift it just right. Stone roof with this heavy sag in the middle, like the whole place was sighing. It didn't have electricity. No lights, no heater, nothing. Just a few stained glass windows that had long since faded into dull streaks of color. The moment I stepped inside, I felt the difference. Colder than outside. Not in a dramatic way, just a still, hollow cold, like the air hadn't moved in years. It smelled like dry dust and concrete. Not musty or moldy, just dry. The way an old garage smells if no one's opened it in a decade. There were no bodies out in the open, obviously. These were sealed wall vaults, plaques, and brass nameplates. Some older than others. I'd seen plenty of them by then. You stop thinking about names too hard once you've done this kind of work for a while. I was about halfway through sweeping when I noticed something that didn't sit right. One of the brass nameplates had been removed and set on the floor, not dropped. Not lying at an angle or scratched up. It was placed, perfectly flat, centered, and the screws, 4 of them, were arranged beside it in a line, each one pointing the same direction. I stood there for a second just staring at it, because that's not something you see. Screws don't fall out in clean lines. And even if someone had unscrewed the thing, why would they set it down like that? I pulled out the maintenance sheet Hal had printed off. That vault was marked as permanently sealed. No scheduled work, no recent family visits, nothing. I looked around. No sign anyone else had been in there. The dust was even all across the floor except for where my boot prints had tracked through. No new footprints. So I reattached the plate, tightened the screws back in, swept around it carefully, and moved on. The next day, I unlocked the gate and found the exact same thing. Same plate, same position, same 4 screws, neatly lined up. This time, I stood there a little longer. Looked for signs, scuff marks, smudges, footprints, anything. But the dust hadn't been disturbed. It looked like no one had stepped inside except me. I thought maybe Hal was messing with me. Not his usual style, but still. I asked him about it when I saw him at lunch. He raised an eyebrow and shook his head. "I don't go near that wing," he said. "Hasn't been a burial in there since '93. That night, I kept running it over in my head. Maybe a bird or a rat had gotten in, but how would they move a metal plate without scratching it? And the screws, that part stuck with me. The care in the arrangement. It didn't feel like mischief. It felt intentional. By the 3rd day, I brought my phone. Took a photo after I reattached the plate. Not because I needed proof, just so I could double-check myself. I did my rounds, came back about an hour later. Plate was on the floor again, screws lined up. But this time, the name had changed. I still have the photo on my old phone. When I first took it, the name on the brass read Marion F. Toller, a name like any other. But when I found it the second time, It said something else. It said, "Lost child." Just those two words. Same lettering, same brass, same position. That was the night I stopped sleeping. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, going back through every second I'd spent in that mausoleum, trying to remember if I'd heard anything, felt anything. I didn't want to go back, but something about it felt like leaving a door open. Like if I didn't finish it, it wouldn't leave me alone. So the next morning, I unlocked the gate one more time. The plate was already on the ground again, but something had changed. The screws weren't in a line, they were standing upright. Each one was sunk straight into the floor, point down, balanced so perfectly it looked staged. I reached down to pick one up and it didn't move. I pulled harder and sliced my thumb on the edge. Blood welled up fast. I turned around to grab my gloves, just for a second. When I looked back, the nameplate was gone. Not shifted, not fallen behind anything, just gone. There hadn't been a single sound. No scraping, no footsteps, no creaking gate, nothing. The air felt heavy and flat. Then I felt a tap of cold on my cheek. I looked up, and the stained glass above the entrance was weeping, not leaking. There was no hole, just these slow, thin trails of water sliding down the inside of the glass. It hadn't rained in almost 2 weeks. I backed out fast, locked the gate, and found Hal. I told him I wasn't going in there again. He didn't argue. He just looked at me real serious and asked, "Did you see her?" I told him no, I hadn't seen anyone. He gave a slow nod. Then he said, "When I started here, my boss told me about that crypt. Girl went missing in town, sometime in the 60s. Her dad carved that plate himself. Put her ashes in there when they found what was left of her." He paused, then added, he didn't want attention. Said naming her would bring people he didn't trust. So he wrote, "Lost child." Then, 2 years later, he hung himself in their garage. I didn't go back. Took odd jobs the rest of the season. Tried to convince myself it was stress, maybe burnout. I was 22 when it happened. It was this weekend security job out near Maple Hollow, Vermont, just something seasonal for the fall festival. I picked it up because my roommate from college, Tyler, said it was an easy gig. The festival ran through all of October, ending the Sunday before Halloween. It took place on this old orchard property called Crestfield Farms. Just a few outbuildings, a big barn on the hill, and a long gravel loop that circled the main event area. They'd pack everything up at sunset and clear out by 8. After that, it was just me, a flashlight, and a two-way radio until 11. The first couple of weekends were uneventful, peaceful even. The orchard smelled like cinnamon and old apples, the kind of scent that just sticks in your clothes. I'd do the loop maybe twice an hour, check all the trailer locks, and hang out near the front shed where they kept backup supplies. I barely needed the map they gave me. It was a straightforward layout. The only thing that felt slightly off was the barn light. It was on a motion sensor, and sometimes I'd see it flicker on before I even rounded the corner. I figured maybe deer were triggering it. There were traps in there for raccoons, so it wasn't crazy to think something small was setting it off. Still, I reported it every time, like protocol said. By the second weekend, though, something started to shift. That Friday, around 9, the radio buzzed with static. Not just the usual soft crackle you hear sometimes, but this weird, sharp interference like someone rubbing sandpaper directly against the mic. Then it just cleared. Completely. No voice, no message, nothing. Just silence. I stood still for a second, waiting, but nothing else came through. I kept walking, probably a fluke, I figured. Around 10, I was finishing my last loop of the night. I got to the barn and noticed the light didn't turn on at all. I waved my arm in front of the sensor. Still nothing. Maybe the bulb had finally gone. No big deal. Then, just as I was about to head back, I heard someone cough from inside. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a short, dry cough, close, like someone standing a few feet away. I stopped, waited, didn't hear anything else. So I unlocked the barn door, stepped inside, and did a full sweep with the flashlight. Nothing. Everything was in place, tools hanging neatly, feed sacks stacked in the back, No footprints in the dust. I called out once. "Hello?" No answer. As I turned to leave, I heard it again. Another cough. Closer. I whipped around and scanned the interior again. Still nothing. But then I noticed this faint scraping noise coming from behind the back wall. Slow, dragging like something heavy sliding across the floor. The thing is, the back wall was solid wood slats. There was no door back there, no opening. Just an exterior wall made of old, nailed-together planks. I walked up to it and knocked. Felt solid. But then I spotted something strange. One of the boards, over on the far left side, looked different. Lighter. Cleaner. Like it hadn't aged like the rest. It was nailed and slightly off-kilter. I tried radioing in again. Barn activity, possible intrusion. Requesting check-in. Static. Then silence. I left the barn and walked the loop again, a little quicker this time. When I reached the front shed, where they stored tools and gas for the hayride tractors, I saw the padlock was hanging open. That one hit me harder than the cough. We were told specifically to lock it before sundown and not open it again till morning. Inside were rakes, fencing wire, gas cans. Someone had definitely been inside. I relocked it and just stood there for a second, listening. Nothing. I walked back up to the barn and stayed put until 11, then left without doing the final loop. The next morning, I told Russ, the guy who ran day logistics, everything, barn sounds, the shed being unlocked, the radio issues. He didn't react much. Just gave this slow nod and said, "I'll check it out," like it was a routine thing. Saturday night, it got worse. The barn light was already on when I arrived, which was weird because it was barely dusk. I hadn't even started my first loop. I walked up to it right away. Front door was locked. Nothing seemed out of place. But around the side of the barn, something in the dirt caught my eye. 3 shallow tracks. Long, narrow scoops in the soil, like someone had dragged a stick or maybe a pole. They started near the edge of the woods and went straight to the barn wall. No footprints, no tire marks. Just those lines, spaced a few inches apart, going right up to the back side of the barn. I followed them and squatted near the wall, right where I'd seen the newer board the night before. Only now, it was gone. Not broken, not hanging loose, just gone. In its place was a narrow gap, just wide enough to fit your arm through. I pointed my flashlight in, half expecting to see nothing. What I saw looked like the start of a tunnel. I'm not even sure that's the right word. It was rough, like something had clawed through dirt, not dug with tools. The beam from my flashlight only lit the first few feet, but it kept going into the ground. No wood beams, no signs of construction, just packed earth. That didn't sit right with me. The barn didn't have a basement. No crawl space either. It was just built on dirt. I stepped back quickly and tried the radio again. Same loud static as the night before, followed by complete silence. I circled the property twice more, and every time I passed the barn, the light went off just before I got close, then popped back on as soon as I passed it. Like it knew. By 10:30, I gave up on walking. I stood 50 feet away from the barn, flashlight ready, and just watched. Nothing moved for a long time. Then, something came out. It didn't use a door, didn't break anything. It just slipped through the wood. The only way I can explain it is, it unfolded itself, like a shadow peeling away from a wall. I caught a glimpse of fabric, maybe pale cloth or skin, I'm not sure which, but it darted fast. Straight across the gravel path, into the woods. I didn't follow. I didn't move. I stayed frozen until the clock hit 11, then walked straight to my car and drove off. My cousin Danny let me use her cabin out in northern Vermont for the fall. I just quit a brutal overnight job at a fulfillment center in Boston, 12-hour shifts, 5 nights a week, under buzzing lights with a headset yelling order numbers in my ear. The cabin felt like a lifeline. Danny called it the retreat, and honestly, that name wasn't far off. I planned to spend the whole month of October there. Nothing complicated. Just walking the woods, reading, sleeping. For the first few days, that's exactly what I did. I settled into a routine. Wake up early, heat water for coffee on the stove, then hike a 4-mile trail that started behind the cabin and loop through a shallow valley before coming back up the other side. It was a peaceful route, quiet except for birds and the occasional snap of a branch. I didn't see anyone else. Not once. The trail wasn't official. Danny and her brothers had cleared it years ago with a couple axes and a lot of determination. They'd marked it with these hand-painted signs nailed to trees. Most were faded and a little crooked, but still legible. Creek, cabin, loop. The words were painted in white, though by now the paint had worn to a dusty gray. I liked those signs. They made the place feel homemade, like it had its own quiet history. On the fourth morning, something changed. One of the signs, the one at a fork where the trail split, was off. It was supposed to point right, back toward the cabin. But now, it was pointing left. I was sure it hadn't been that way the day before. The nail holding it in place looked solid, and the wood wasn't rotted or bent. It didn't look like it had fallen or been knocked loose. It looked intentional. I stood there for a minute, then shrugged it off. Probably a strong gust of wind, or maybe a deer had brushed against it. That happens, right? I turned right, the way I knew, and made it back without a problem. The next day, I checked again. Still turned. By day 8, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time I passed the fork, that sign seemed to lean a little more deliberately left. Eventually, I caved. Curiosity is a weird thing. It starts small, then itches at the back of your mind until you finally give in. I followed where it pointed. The new path was tighter, more overgrown. I had to duck under branches and step around brambles that tugged at my sleeves. But there was a path, faint but real. Something or someone had been through there before. Maybe it was an old hunting trail. Danny had mentioned there were old logging routes crisscrossing the woods from back when the land was managed for timber. About 15 minutes in, the trail opened into a small clearing. The ground was uneven and scattered with sticks and bark. Right in the center, there was this crude little structure. Looked like someone had leaned branches together to make a shelter, or maybe it had collapsed years ago and no one ever bothered to clear it. The ground underneath was darker than the rest, and even though it hadn't rained in a couple days, the soil looked damp, almost black. There was a smell too, faint but wrong, sweet, a little sour, like fruit that had gone soft in a paper bag. I didn't stay long. I stepped around the structure and kept going. Told myself it was just a forgotten campsite. Plenty of weird stuff ends up in the woods. 20 minutes later, I found another sign, same size, same style, nailed to a birch tree. It said loop, only this one didn't look faded. The paint was fresh, still glossy in some spots. The arrow pointed straight ahead. That didn't sit right. I'd already gone farther than the original loop. There shouldn't have been another sign out here, especially not one that looked brand new. I turned back. As I retraced my steps, something felt different. The trees seemed closer together. The path that had taken me 15 minutes and now seemed to fold in on itself. It only took 5 to get back to the clearing. The stick shelter looked untouched, still damp underneath. That smell still lingered in the air. Back at the original fork, the sign was gone. Completely. Just the nail sticking out of the tree. Nothing else. I walked straight back to the cabin. Locked the door behind me. That night, I couldn't settle. Every creak of the roof made my skin crawl. At one point, I stepped outside to breathe. The woods were pitch black and unnervingly still. No breeze, no crickets, no night birds. Just a wall of dark trees. The next morning, I drove into town, bought some groceries, and picked up a trail camera from the hardware store. Just one of those basic battery-powered models with a motion sensor. I mounted it on a tree near the fork, angled right where the sign had been turned. Nothing the first 2 nights. On the third morning, I checked the SD card. One trigger, 4:28 a.m. The picture was dark, grainy, but clear enough. There was a figure tall, barefoot, hard to make out if they were shirtless or just wearing dark clothes. They were moving left to right across the frame, fast but controlled. Their head was tilted low, like they were ducking out of view. They didn't stop, just walked out of frame and vanished into the trees. The weirdest part, there was no earlier frame of them entering the shot, just that one moment, as if they'd materialized mid-step. That night was worse. Every sound in the cabin felt too loud. The wood in the stove shifting, the soft plunk of water from the faucet, even the wind brushing the windows made me freeze. Around midnight, I heard a knock. One single knock, soft on the porch railing. I didn't move, just sat there in the dark, not even breathing. I waited until the generator kicked on around 2 and filled the room with its low hum. When the sun came up, I checked outside. No footprints. The ground was covered in dry leaves, but even so, no disturbed spots, no scuffed dirt. Just quiet. That afternoon, I checked the camera again. New footage. Same exact time. 4:28 a.m. This time, the figure moved slower. It came from the same direction, stopped at the fork, right where the sign had been. Then it turned toward the camera. It started walking forward, one step at a time, getting closer. Its shape began to fill the lens, then static. I didn't even bother packing. Left the food, the bedding, the trail cam. Locked the cabin, got in the car, and drove south before the sun went down. The town I lived in back then, Marlow, held a fall harvest festival every October. It was one of those small town traditions that everybody got involved in, whether they wanted to or not. I'd helped out the last few years, usually cleanup duty or early morning setup, nothing complicated. That year, the town coordinator, a guy named Donnie, asked if I'd cover overnight security. I was working part-time at Parker's Hardware, so I guess I had that competent adult aura or something close to it. The pay wasn't much, but I wasn't exactly overwhelmed with better options, so I said sure. The festival was set up at the main community park. Food trucks lined the paved path, booths and tents filled the grassy field, and down by the creek, they'd built a little hay bale maze and petting zoo. One vendor brought in handmade furniture, another sold vintage knives, and the woodworking club had a whole setup of carved toys. Stuff too valuable to leave sitting out. So each night, the town rented a big portable storage pod to lock it all up in. The rest went in the utility shed down by the water, the one the maintenance crew used during summer rec programs. I was supposed to check the locks on both spots, keep an eye on things, and call the sheriff's office if anything got out of hand. Donnie made it sound like my biggest worry would be high schoolers trying to sneak in for late-night dares. Friday night was exactly what I expected. I brought a thermos of coffee, a folding chair, and the flashlight I usually kept in my truck. The town gave me a two-way radio, and another guy, Reed, was stationed on the far end of the park near the hayride trail. He worked maintenance for the parks department, so he knew the area better than me. They let him have one of those little utility golf carts, the kind with a flatbed on the back. He did hourly check-ins over the radio, and we agreed to do walkthroughs every couple of hours. Around midnight, I heard raccoons scrapping by the dumpsters, but that was it. Just wind, rustling leaves, and the occasional creak from a tent flap shifting in the breeze. Saturday night was different. The festival shut down around 10. By 11, the last food truck had pulled out, and the final stragglers had cleared the lot. Reed and I did a loop together, checked the tent flaps, secured the pod, made sure no one had passed out behind the apple cider booth, and then we split up. He headed toward the hay maze, I took the vendor aisle. Most of the lights had been turned off by then, but the town had strung bulb lights across the main row, which cast just enough glow to make you feel less alone. I'd just double-checked the locks on the storage pod when Reed came through the radio. His voice sounded weird, tight, clipped, like he was holding his breath. He said, "Hey, come quick." The back of the petting zoo's ripped open. I asked if it looked like vandalism. He paused and said, "No, not cut, shredded." By the time I got over there, he was standing with his flashlight pointed at the ground. The rear corner of the fence was torn apart. The wire wasn't snipped. It was bent outward, warped like something had grabbed it and pulled. A couple wooden posts were snapped clean at the base. Reed didn't look at me when he said it, just kept staring down at the torn fence. One of the goats is gone. There wasn't blood. That's the part I keep going over in my head. No blood. Just this odd drag pattern through the soft dirt, across the gravel, and into the leaves. The tracks went straight toward the tree line, past the edge of the park, down toward where the old maintenance access trail used to be. I told Reed we needed to call the sheriff's office. He shook his head, said if it turned out to be a coyote or some loose dog, we'd look ridiculous. The sheriff already thought Reed was dramatic. There'd been some incident the year before with a possum in the tennis courts, and he didn't want to give the guy another excuse to laugh us off. We argued, quietly but sharp. I said this wasn't normal. He said maybe the goat panicked and squeezed through. I pointed out the drag trail again. Then, finally, we agreed to follow the trail just a bit. If we saw anything too weird, we'd call it in. We walked in silence, just our flashlights and the wet crunch of leaves. The smell was stronger the further in we went, damp wood, rotting leaves, something like mildew. About 20 yards in, the drag marks faded, but we kept going. Maybe 3 minutes later, my flashlight caught something. It was the goat, sort of. The front half was there, still, like it had frozen mid-movement. Its front legs were tucked under, eyes dull. The rest, hindquarters, tail, half its spine, was just gone. Not torn, not chewed, just missing. It looked like something had dropped it from a height. The way it landed didn't make sense. Reed whispered, "Do you hear that?" At first I didn't. Then I did. This ticking sound. Faint but close, like claws tapping bark. High up. We both aimed our lights into the trees. Nothing. Then the sound came again, this time behind us. Then silence. We didn't talk. We didn't talk. We just started walking back. Fast, then faster. About halfway to the park, my radio made a noise static, then Reed's voice. Only it didn't sound right. It was slurred, warped, like his mouth wasn't moving the way it should. He said, "It's not, don't stop, just don't." Then the line went dead. I stopped walking, turned around. Reed was gone. I spun in a full circle, scanning the trail with my light. Nothing. I shouted for him. No answer. Then snap. Close behind me, like a thick branch cracking under weight. I ran. I didn't look. Just ran until the path curved and I saw the faint glow of the vendor tents through the trees. When I reached the open field, it was dead quiet. Too quiet. No frogs. No wind. I tried Reed's radio again. Nothing. Called his cell. Straight to voicemail. I thought about hiding in the storage pod, but I didn't have the key. Then I remembered the old shed by the creek. It had a landline. I sprinted, got inside, locked the door, bolted it. The air inside smelled like old paint and fertilizer. I grabbed the phone off the wall, one of those heavy rotary ones, and dialed the sheriff's office. The dispatcher picked up fast, but I could barely get words out. Told her something took Reed. That we'd found the goat. That something was still out there. She kept asking me to slow down, to repeat myself. That's when something hit the side of the shed, hard, metal on metal, then footsteps, fast, circling the building. I dropped the phone and backed away from the door. There was a window high on the wall above the tool rack. Narrow, dusty. I climbed onto the workbench and peeked through it. I saw Reed. He was standing just beyond the edge of the shed light, not moving, arms at his sides, head tilted. I almost opened the window, almost called out. Then he stepped forward. His face didn't look right, too flat. The skin was there, but it didn't match the shape underneath. His mouth sat too low on his jaw. His movements were slow, wrong, like he was guessing what a person should do. He didn't blink, didn't breathe. He just stood there, like he was waiting for me to come out. Then he turned and walked back into the trees. Deputies showed up about 15 minutes later. I met them by the parking lot and led them to the shed. No Reed, no footprints, no damage to the building. They brought in dogs at sunrise, search teams, a wildlife specialist. For 2 days they combed the woods. They found what was left of the goat. A shredded piece of Reed's reflective vest caught on the fence. That was it. The sheriff told me it was likely a cougar. That everything else, Reed's voice, the thing I thought I saw, was just stress and adrenaline. He asked if I wanted to make a formal statement. I told him no. I quit the next morning, packed up my stuff, and moved downstate by the end of the week. The apartment I was renting sat above a shuttered antique store on Knox Avenue. The shop had been closed for years, belonged to an older couple who passed away a few months apart, and their son, who lived somewhere out west, never came back to deal with it. The storefront still looked full, like someone had just forgotten to open for the day. Faded dolls, rusted scissors, cracked glass ashtrays, all arranged in dusty windows. Some of it was sun-bleached beyond recognition. The door downstairs stuck when the wind blew just right, and the whole building creaked if the temperature dropped too fast. But the apartment itself was decent. Cozy, cheap, and walking distance from everything I needed. By October, I'd found a rhythm. Work during the day, dinner with Bea, my roommate, on Monday and Thursday nights, groceries on Sunday afternoons. I liked my routines. I liked the quiet. It made me feel like I had a little control over things. That fall, the leaves changed fast. I swear, it was like someone flipped a switch. One morning, the trees were all still clinging to summer. By the end of that week, the entire town looked like the cover of a nature calendar. Bright oranges and reds blanketed the sidewalks. You couldn't walk half a block without hearing the crunch underfoot. People actually smiled more. Parents let their kids play a little longer outside after school. It felt gentle, in a way. But then the rain came, and everything turned slippery. The leaves stuck to the pavement like wet paper, covered every surface. People couldn't see where the curb ended and the street began. There were accidents, minor ones mostly, a few bruises, a dislocated shoulder. One guy fell outside the laundromat and knocked out 2 teeth. We had to put up printed signs at the library's entrance that said "Caution, WS" in all caps. In all caps. We taped them to the glass, but people walked right past without noticing. Or they'd glance, nod, and still end up sliding 2 steps later. The Monday it happened was a strange day, muggy in a way that didn't belong to October. I remember being annoyed at how my shirt clung to my back while shelving. I'd worn a light jacket that morning and regretted it before noon. The whole day felt sluggish, like the air was thicker than usual. Bea had texted me in the afternoon to ask what time I'd be home. Mondays were her dinner nights. She liked cooking elaborate stuff to unwind after work. I told her I'd be back by 8. But then, of course, someone came in at the last minute. This guy, mid to late 50s, I think, walks in at 7:45 with a folder full of papers and asks if someone can help him scan them. He wasn't rude or lost or anything, just slow. Moved like he had to think about every single thing before he did it, and I didn't feel right rushing him. So I helped. It was after 8:30 by the time he finished. I locked up, turned off the lights, texted Bea that I'd be late, and stepped out into the drizzle. She sent back a thumbs up and a blurry photo of pasta simmering on the stove. I smiled at that. The kind of photo you send someone when you're hungry and smug about it. My walk home usually took 10, maybe 12 minutes. There's a main street route, which is a little longer, and then there's the alley shortcut behind the library that cuts through to Talbot Street. Not a real road, just a narrow service path between the old pharmacy and a long abandoned florist shop. Not technically public, but no one ever stopped me. It saved time. I'd used it more times than I could count. Most people avoided it, especially at night. The buildings on either side were tall and close together, so it was always dark, even during the day, and the drainage was awful. Every time it rained, puddles formed that took days to dry. But I knew where to step. I'd gotten good at spotting the safe patches. That night, I stepped into the alley like I always did. The ground was wet, the leaves dark and mashed flat. I walked slow, more out of routine than caution. My boots slid a little, but nothing serious. Then, out of nowhere, I went down. It was fast. No warning. One moment I was walking, the next I was flat on the ground. My left leg folded under me, my elbow smacked hard against the wall, and a flash of pain tore through my knee. I gritted my teeth, tried to sit up, but the second I moved, this sharp, tearing sensation exploded behind my kneecap. I stopped, leaned against the brick wall, breathing through my teeth, waited to see if it would settle. It didn't. I touched my knee and felt something shift under my fingers. Something that wasn't supposed to move. My whole leg shook. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my phone. The screen lit up, then flickered, then died. Just black. I held the button down. Nothing. Maybe the rain had gotten into it. I cursed quietly, mostly at myself. I looked toward the end of the alley. I wasn't far from the exit, maybe 20 feet. I considered crawling the rest of the way, but every time I tried to shift my weight, the pain flared again. Hot and deep, like something inside was tearing more with each movement. So I waited. I could see cars passing by on Talbot, their headlights washing across the mouth of the alley. I tried calling out. First softly, then louder. No one heard me. Then I heard footsteps, coming from behind me, from the direction I'd come. Not fast, just steady, measured, like someone taking a stroll. Relief hit me for a second. I turned toward the sound and called out, "Hey!" I fell. "I think I messed up my leg, can you help?" The footsteps didn't stop, didn't change speed. A figure came into view, tall, wearing a long, hooded coat, hands in their pockets. The hood cast a shadow over their face. I tried again. "Do you have a phone? Mine's dead." Still nothing. They kept walking, right up to me, then stopped, just stood there. I could barely make out their face. Pale skin, thin lips, a bit of stubble on the jaw, no expression. Then they said, quiet but clear, "Do you remember what day it is?" I blinked at them. "What?" They crouched down, not to help, just to look, eyes level with mine. "You always go this way," they said. "Sometimes with headphones, not when it rains. You look behind you at the end of the alley, like it matters." I froze. "I've seen you 12 times, they went on. First was September 10th. You wore yellow." My mouth was dry. Then they reached into their coat and pulled something out. It was my wallet. I didn't even know I'd dropped it. They opened it, looked at my ID, then placed it gently in my lap. "I like the yellow better," they said, and brushed a finger across the sleeve of my black coat. I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe right. Then they stood, slowly, turned, walked back into the dark. Didn't say anything else, didn't run, just vanished. I sat there shaking, heart pounding so hard it made my head hurt. I didn't even try to move. Not until another set of footsteps came, faster this time. A kid, maybe 16, on a skateboard, hoodie pulled up, earbuds in. He stopped cold when he saw me on the ground, yanked his earbuds out and said, "Holy crap, are you okay?" before pulling out his phone. He kept glancing into the shadows behind me while we waited for the ambulance, like he half expected something to crawl out of them. Paramedics got there in 10 minutes. Torn ACL, surgery, months of physical therapy. I was out of work for a while. Bea covered for me more than she should have. I told the cops everything, every detail. They took it seriously, but there weren't any cameras in the alley. No prints, no evidence, no leads. My apartment sat right up against a stretch of state forest, just this endless wall of trees behind the building, all tangled up with brush and fallen logs. In the fall, it was genuinely beautiful. That Monday in late October, I'd just gotten off a 12-hour shift at the clinic. I'm a medical assistant at this small place just outside town. I was dead on my feet, but still restless. Walking helped clear my head after those long days, and the trail was quiet that time of year. I popped in my earbuds, nothing playing, just in case I passed someone and didn't feel like small talk, and headed out. I was maybe 10 minutes in when I saw it. Just ahead, in the middle of the trail, was this really neat pile of leaves. Too neat. The trail itself was always a mess, crunchy, scattered, like a kid had dumped out a box of fall. But this was different. The pile was perfectly oval, maybe 4 feet across, yellow sycamore leaves stacked into this smooth little mound. It looked deliberate. I stopped a few feet away and stared at it. At first I figured maybe someone raked it up for their dog to roll in or something. People do weird things. But then I saw what was inside. Tucked right in the center was a black zip tie, new looking, clean, no packaging, no litter anywhere around it. I didn't touch it, just stood there a moment, then gave it a wide berth and kept walking. Tried to forget it. 2 nights later, I went back. I don't know why. I guess part of me wanted to prove it was just some random, harmless thing. Same trail, same time. I was maybe half a mile in when I saw the pile again. Same spot, same shape. But the zip tie was gone. This time there was a tiny sock, pale pink, like a baby would wear. Just one, clean as anything, tucked just under the edge of the leaves. I froze. It didn't look dirty. Didn't look dropped. It looked placed. I stood there for a full minute, not moving, not breathing. I didn't touch it. Didn't take a picture. I just turned around and walked home with my fists clenched the entire way. I barely slept that night. Every little creak in the building made me sit up and listen. At work the next morning I mentioned it to one of the nurses I was friendly with. She chuckled and said it was probably teenagers messing around, but I was reading too much into it. I laughed back, but it didn't feel funny. Later that day I called the parks department, told them about the sock and the zip tie. The woman on the phone sounded polite but distracted. She said they'd send someone to take a look. The next couple of times I walked the trail, it was normal. No piles, no zip ties, no socks. I started to think maybe I'd just found some weird little coincidence. Then Halloween night happened. I stayed in that evening, handed out candy, watched some bad horror movies on TV. Around 9, after the last trick-or-treaters had cleared out, I pulled on my hoodie and went for a quick walk, just to shake off the sugar crash. I told myself I wouldn't go far, just the front stretch of the trail. I didn't even make it past the first bend. There was another pile. This one was bigger, wider, flatter. The leaves were darker, older, and someone had arranged 3 objects right on top. A red shoelace, a broken pencil, a folded strip of duct tape. Lined up in a row, spaced just evenly enough to be unsettling. All of them were clean. All of them looked like they'd been placed carefully. I didn't go near it. Didn't pause to inspect. I just slowly walked backward until the pile was out of sight, then turned and walked home without looking back. The next morning, there was a notice taped to the front door of our building. Someone had broken into one of the basement storage units overnight. The super didn't say what was taken, just that we should all double-check our locks. Mine was fine. Still, it made my skin crawl. That evening, I got home from work around 8. It was already dark, cold, too real cold. I was climbing the stairs to my second-floor apartment when I spotted something wedged between the slats of the wooden railing. A zip tie. Black, small, clipped shut. It wasn't holding anything. It was just there. I didn't touch it. I stood there for a while, staring at it, holding my keys so tightly my fingers went red. Then I went inside and locked the door. That night was rough. I kept hearing things, soft thumps, the elevator motor kicking in, a door closing somewhere down the hall. Around 3 in the morning, I got up to check my front door just to be sure. That's when I saw the smudge. Right in the center of the peephole, this little foggy circle, like someone had leaned in and breathed on the glass. I wiped it off with my sleeve and stood there for a long time listening. Didn't go back to bed. A couple days later, a guy from upstairs knocked on my door. We'd talked maybe once before, in the laundry room. He looked nervous. Asked if I'd seen anyone outside the building at night. I said no, and asked why. He told me he thought someone had been standing outside his bedroom window around midnight the night before. His window faces the woods. After that, I started parking under the lot lights, even though it meant a longer walk. That night, I stayed up watching a show with the volume low, just trying to zone out. Around 1, I went to the bathroom. When I came back, I glanced out through the blinds. Someone was standing on the trail, They weren't walking, just standing there facing the building. I couldn't see their face, too far, too dark, just the shape of them, still not moving. My phone was on the couch. I looked away for half a second to grab it, and when I looked back, they were gone, just gone, like they'd stepped back into the trees. That was the night I stopped parking at home. I started leaving my car at the clinic and walking in. It was about 15 minutes, but I felt better being farther from those woods. Then that Friday, I found a note under my windshield wiper, folded napkin. Inside, in messy handwriting, were 3 words I still watch. I didn't hesitate. I drove straight to the police station. I told them everything, every little detail. The zip ties, the piles, the sock, the person on the trail, the smudge on my peephole, and now the note. They listened, asked questions, wrote it all down, but they weren't alarmed. They said there was no real threat, no actual crime, no name, no suspect. They told me to keep a log, so I did. I bought cameras, motion sensors, one of those doorstops with the built-in alarm. I carried pepper spray clipped to my bag and started letting co-workers walk me to my car. I got used to sleeping with the lights on and a baseball bat by the bed. And then, for a while, nothing. 2 weeks went by. Then 3, a month. Silence. I started to exhale a little. Thanksgiving came. I didn't travel. I stayed in town, spent the afternoon cleaning, trying to get my head back on straight. Around 6, I took out the trash. The dumpsters were tucked in this little dark corner of the parking lot, but I didn't think anything of it. Just a normal chore. When I came back up the stairs, my apartment door was cracked open. Just slightly, just enough. I froze. I never, ever leave it that way. I backed down the stairs and called 911. The cops showed up fast, cleared the apartment. No one inside, nothing stolen. Everything looked normal, except my hallway rug. It had been flipped around completely. The pattern was facing the wrong direction. Someone had picked it up, turned it, and laid it back down. I didn't even notice at first, but once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I moved out a week later, found a place across town in a newer building with keycard entry, cameras in the halls, and floodlights that stay on all night. It's louder, more expensive, but I sleep better. I'd been planning the trip for a while, 3 nights through a quiet, overlooked section of northern Vermont, mostly a web of old logging trails, forgotten forest roads, and some loose switchbacks hugging the ridges. I didn't want the Appalachian crowds. By late October, that whole area empties out anyway. Most people had packed up their gear for the season and gone home. So I picked this route on purpose. I wanted to go somewhere where no one could find me unless I wanted them to. No texts, no updates, no questions, just space. I think part of me hoped that if I made it through on my own, completely alone, I'd come back clearer. Not better necessarily, but less broken. I started at Silverton Lake, aiming to make a wide loop east through the Lantern Hollow area, then curl back west and reconnect with the old access road near Lorne Creek. Day 1 was easy enough. Cold, but not miserable. The leaves were mostly down, carpeting the trail in these quiet, dry layers. Everything felt hollowed out, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're walking through something half asleep. The hills had lost their cover, their bare ribs poking out through the brush. I made camp just past a narrow bend where someone had once tried to build a hunting blind. 2 walls still stood, just enough to shield me from the wind. I boiled some water, stirred in a packet of noodles, and flipped through an old paperback I'd brought. Something about a guy running cons in Arizona. I couldn't really focus on the story, but it passed the time. I fell asleep early. The next day I climbed toward Raven Hill. It's not high enough to be a real summit, but there's a busted fire tower up there that gives you a decent view if you're willing to risk the climb. Around mid-morning, I dropped my pack at the base, climbed the ladder, and sat with my thermos of tea. The sky was clear. I should have been able to see for miles, but something was off. At first, I thought it was my glasses, except I wasn't wearing any. I'd had radial keratotomy back in the spring, outdated, sure, but it had worked fine until then. This was different. The edges of everything in the distance were smudged, like someone had taken an eraser to the horizon. Trees lost their outlines. Blazes blurred into the bark. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, took a sip of tea and tried again. Still blurred. I blamed the wind, maybe the altitude, maybe dry eyes. I told myself it was temporary and climbed back down. I kept walking. The trail dropped into a valley with these long rows of firs, then turned into a gradual descent toward the old Lantern Hollow Junction. My pace slowed. The farther I went, the more my eyes betrayed me. The blur didn't go away. If anything, it got worse. And not just the vision. The path felt wrong, not haunted, not bad vibes, just wrong in a quiet, practical way. Like things weren't where they should be. Roots crossed the trail where I could have sworn they hadn't before. I saw a flat rock with a rust stain I recognized, but in the wrong direction. A low, crumbling stone wall appeared to the right of the trail, then vanished again after 20 minutes. I kept checking my map, but I couldn't read it well anymore. The lines fuzzed out. Letters looked melted. I tried my phone, hoping maybe I'd get a GPS ping or something, but the glare made the screen unreadable. No bars. I started tying bits of paracord to tree branches. Orange, bright, easy to spot. I tied one every 30 minutes, just in case. That afternoon, the light dimmed faster than I expected. I'd lost track of how far I'd come. My knees ached, and my hands had started to stiffen. I made camp earlier than planned. No fire, just a cold dinner of jerky and a protein bar. I zipped up my bag and pulled the tarp low over the top. I woke up around 2 in the morning. Something was walking past the tent. Not through the leaves, past them. A single step, then nothing, then another, then nothing again. Slow, 2 feet, 2 feet. I didn't move. I've been camping most of my life. I know what a deer sounds like. I know the difference between 4 legs and 2. This wasn't a raccoon. This wasn't a bear. It walked like a person, heavy enough to break the silence but soft enough to be intentional. And then it stopped. I don't know how long I waited, listening. Eventually, everything went quiet again. No more steps. No snapping twigs. No wind. Just that kind of silence that rings in your ears if you stay in it too long. In the morning, I got up and checked the area. My own tracks were easy to find, deep from the weight of the pack, angled slightly from how I walk, but nothing else. No double prints. No scuffs. Not even disturbed leaves. I packed faster than usual. I couldn't see well, but I figured if I kept moving downhill, I'd eventually hit the old snowmobile trail near Barlow Creek. Maybe 3 hours max. I told myself that, over and over. But the trail didn't behave. Markers were missing, or I couldn't find them. I tied another piece of cord, then another. I kept checking trees, scanning for signs I'd passed before. And then, just before noon, I found one of my cords already tied to a tree I hadn't seen before. Same color, same knot, same frayed end. But this tree was different. A red birch with bark peeling like paper streamers. I stood there and stared at it for way too long. I knew I hadn't looped back. I was sure I hadn't. That's when my chest started to tighten. I moved faster, tripped once, got up, tripped again. I stopped worrying about the trail, just tried to head down, didn't even care where it led. I wanted asphalt, noise, anything that didn't smell like moss and cold. But the forest kept going, like it had folded over itself. The ridges didn't drop. The light didn't change. I kept waiting for a break in the trees, a view, something to anchor me. Nothing came. By late afternoon, my hands were basically useless. I couldn't feel my fingertips. My left boot had soaked through. I pulled the tarp over a little hollow and crawled into the bag again. My legs cramped up. My face stung. I kept my eyes shut to stop thinking about how much worse the blurring had gotten. Sometime after midnight, I felt pressure on the tarp. A single point. Dead center. Like something was resting its palm on the top. I didn't move. It wasn't the wind. It didn't shift or flutter. It just pressed down. I could feel the weight of it through the fabric. Then it slid slowly down the slope of the tarp, stopping near my hip. I didn't breathe, Didn't twitch. It stayed there for maybe a minute. Then it lifted, smooth and quiet. The air inside the tarp changed, got thinner, like something had sucked a little of the warmth away with it. I didn't sleep again that night. In the morning, I could barely see, just fuzzy shapes and colors. My scarf had iced over. I wrapped it around my face anyway, left a slit to see out of, and started crawling. My knees burned, my elbows throbbed. I kept my head low and moved in short bursts. Downhill, always downhill. Eventually, I reached a stand of pine trees that looked different enough to matter. I collapsed in the middle of them. I must have passed out. When I opened my eyes again barely, I heard a voice, not imagined, not echoing, real. "Hey, you okay, man?" It was a hunter, maybe 60, blaze orange vest, rifle slung at his side. He ran toward me, knelt. I couldn't make out his face. He said, "Holy hell. You're half frozen. How long you been out here?" He dragged me up, half carried me to his ATV, drove me out to a service road. From there, he called in rescue. They got me to a hospital in about an hour. I stayed there 11 days. I lost 3 fingers on my left hand, 2 on my right. My corneas were too damaged to repair. I walk with a limp now. They told me I was lucky. I was house sitting for my friend Darren while he and his family were away visiting his in-laws in Indiana. He lived just outside of Eastwick, Connecticut. Not exactly deep woods or anything, but far enough out that once the sun went down, the only things you heard were the wind dragging through the trees and the occasional rustle of something small in the leaves. It was the last week of October. Darren's kids had gone a little overboard decorating for Halloween that year. Plastic tombstones in the front flower beds, fake spider webs sagging between the porch rails, those blinking jack-o'-lantern lights that never blink in sync no matter how many times you reset them. The porch had a scarecrow too, slouched in a lawn chair, with a floppy hat and straw wrists sticking out like it had given up halfway through October. The house sat at the end of a winding driveway that cut through a small patch of woods. The trees bent over it like they were closing in. Most of the leaves had already dropped, except for this one stubborn maple near the front steps. It held onto its leaves longer than everything else, bright red, almost defiant against the grays and browns around it. Every time I pulled up, it looked like something out of a postcard. My job was easy. Feed their 2 cats, pick up the mail, water a couple of dying houseplants, and make sure nothing flooded, exploded, or caught fire. I slept in the guest room upstairs, made coffee in the mornings, scrolled through my phone for longer than I should have, and took long walks to kill time. The trail behind their house looped into a state park, and most days I had it completely to myself. For the first few days, everything was fine. On the 4th morning, I checked the mailbox and found something odd. Wedged between a furniture store flyer and a water bill was a plain white envelope. No stamp, no return address. Just the word "sorry" scrawled across the front in thick red marker, all caps. Inside, a blank sheet of printer paper. No message, no signature, just empty. I stared at it for a minute, then set it aside on the counter. Figured it was some kid's idea of a Halloween joke. The kind of thing you do when you're bored and your mom won't let you go out past dark. I didn't really think much of it at the time. That night, I woke up a little after 2. Not because of a sound, really. More like a shift. You know how sometimes you wake up and can't figure out why, but something just feels off? That was it. I sat there in the dark for a minute, listening. No creaks, no meowing, just stillness. Then I noticed the porch light was out. I always left it on. Every night. It had worked fine the night before. I got up, walked to the front door, and flicked the switch a few times. Nothing. The bulb hadn't burned out. It wasn't that kind of flicker. It was just dead. The cats weren't making any noise either. They usually went nuts around that time, chasing each other, knocking over whatever I forgot to close. But that night, I didn't hear a single paw step. I grabbed a flashlight from the drawer and stepped outside. Just a quick look, I told myself. The air had that bite to it, cold enough that your breath feels like a warning. I swung the beam of light across the porch and down the steps, then up toward the tree. The maple looked wrong. A few of the lower branches were bent, not broken, but curved down like they'd been climbed, and near the trunk, just above eye level, were muddy smears. Fresh ones. They streaked across the bark like someone had dragged a boot across it while pulling themselves up. I stood there longer than I probably should have, staring at the marks, trying to figure out a rational explanation. Raccoons don't wear shoes. I checked that the door was locked 3 times before going back inside. Didn't even pretend to sleep after that. The next morning, I went out to take another look. In daylight, the mud was even more obvious. Dark streaks and a faint tread pattern that looked just enough like a boot to make my stomach knot up. I took a few pictures and called Darren, asked if any of his neighbors were the type to pull dumb pranks. He laughed and said no. Everyone around there was retired, quiet. The kind of people who called the police over noisy leaf blowers. He told me to call the sheriff if I was freaked out. I told him I was fine. I wasn't. That afternoon, I went out for a walk on the trail again, just to clear my head. Took my time, didn't rush. When I got back, there was a second envelope. This one was under the doormat. Same red marker. It said, "I thought you said yes." Same thing inside blank paper. I stood there with it in my hand for way too long. I hadn't spoken to anyone that day. Hadn't made a phone call. Hadn't even opened a window. I hadn't posted online, hadn't answered texts. I hadn't said anything. That night, I didn't even pretend to go to bed. I turned on every light in the house, double-checked every lock, and sat at the kitchen table with the flashlight and the biggest knife I could find. Not dramatic, just the one that felt solid in my hand. I kept glancing out the window at that tree. The branches still looked bent. Hours passed. Midnight. 1. 2. I started to think maybe I was imagining it all. Then, a little after 3:30, I heard it. Footsteps. Outside. Slow, heavy steps through dry leaves. Crunch. Like someone was walking on purpose but didn't want to be heard. I turned off the lights and crouched by the window. My heart was pounding in that annoying way where you can hear it in your ears. I peeled back the curtain just an inch. There was someone standing by the tree, not moving, just standing, facing the house. They were tall, at least 6 feet, wearing something dark. I couldn't make out the face, just the outline in the moonlight. They didn't move for a long time, just stayed there. I picked up my phone and called the sheriff's office. It rang once, then went to voicemail. Tried again. Same thing. The figure didn't move. Then, slowly, they raised one arm and pointed at the house. That was it. I was done. I grabbed the cats, my keys, and my bag and went straight out the back door. Got in the car and drove. I didn't even check the mirrors until I was 10 minutes down the road. Ended up parked at a gas station just off the highway, sitting there under the fluorescents until sunrise. I texted Darren around 6 a.m. Told him I wasn't going back. He'd have to figure something else out. I didn't hear back for a few hours. When he finally responded, he was understanding but confused. He said nothing had ever happened like that before, that he'd come back early if I needed him to. I told him not to bother. I was already gone. But later that day, after getting some sleep, I drove back just once. Middle of the afternoon, full sun, just to drop the keys through the mail slot. Everything looked fine. Normal. Porch light worked. No mud on the tree. No sign anyone had ever been there. Except for one thing. One of those fake tombstones in the mulch bed, the ones his kids had set up, had been moved. It was facing the house now. And someone had written across it in black marker, "I waited." I left the keys and never stepped foot on that property again. Darren told me nothing else ever happened. No more letters, no more signs. Cats were fine, house was fine. He chalked it up to a Halloween prank and moved on. I didn't. I changed my number, moved to a different place. Didn't tell most people why. It felt ridiculous trying to explain it anyway. I was working a seasonal gig with Parks and Rec, nothing fancy, just handling vendor logistics, cleanup, traffic flow, that sort of thing. It was decent work, reliable. Most days it was cones, trash duty, and folding tables. Nothing weird, nothing worth remembering. That morning had gone like all the others. I'd shown up early, helped direct the vendor vans to their assigned slots, stacked a few barricades, grabbed coffee from a booth that gave free drinks to staff. I liked the market. There was this rhythm to it, especially at the end of the season. Parents juggling toddlers, teenagers trying to flirt while pretending to shop, old couples buying cinnamon sticks and squash like it was a tradition. I was stationed at the south parking lot entrance that afternoon. The pumpkin carving contest had just wrapped up. A group of kids darted past me, sticky fingers from apple cider donuts, tote bags stuffed with caramel corn and plastic pumpkins. I stepped back to let them through, and when I looked down, I saw it. A single small mitten. Blue, fuzzy. Looked like it would fit a toddler. No matching pair, no tag. Just lying there in the grass, right at the edge of the sidewalk. I picked it up and carried it over to the volunteer tent. Set it gently on the lost and found table beside a cracked phone case and some sunglasses. I even smoothed it out a little, not sure why. Habit, maybe. The next 20 minutes passed in the usual blur, shouting over music, helping a vendor find an extension cord, stopping a toddler from climbing into a compost bin. Then I saw her. She wasn't anyone I recognized, which was rare for Ashwood. Not a regular, not one of the seasonal tourists, not staff. She looked like she didn't want to be seen. Brown hoodie pulled low, faded leggings, rubber boots scuffed with something pale, maybe dust or flour. She didn't carry a purse, no tote bag, no pumpkin, no cider, no kid tugging at her hand. She kept walking this loop around the vendor stalls, just the far outer edge. Never stopped to browse, didn't even glance at the tables. Her head stayed down, but not like she was shy, more like she was searching for something. And she muttered, not talking to herself, muttering. It was lower than that, like the kind of whisper you'd make if you were rehearsing something and didn't want anyone to hear. Her lips barely moved, but the words, whatever they were, kept coming in this steady stream. Her hands kept twitching, opening, closing, like she was shaking something off her fingers, over and over. I watched her long enough to feel uncomfortable about it. That wasn't normal. You can feel when someone's off, and she was off in a way I couldn't name. I told myself not to stare. It's a public event. People get nervous in crowds. I've known people with social anxiety who look like they're being hunted just standing in line. Maybe she was waiting for someone. Maybe she was overwhelmed. Maybe she didn't know where to go. But here's the part that stuck with me. Every single time she passed the volunteer tent, her head tilted toward that blue mitten. Not a quick glance, she focused on it. Just the mitten. Didn't look at the table, didn't scan the other items. Just stared at that small, lonely glove like it meant something. She never touched it, never reached out. But every time she passed, the muttering got louder. That's when I went over and asked if she needed help. I stepped into her path gently, hands relaxed, voice low. Hey, you looking for something? She didn't look at me, just kept pacing, like I wasn't there. I stepped back and let her pass. At that point, I probably should have told a supervisor, but nothing had technically happened, and the last thing I wanted was to make a scene if it turned out she was just dealing with something personal. About 5 minutes later, the pie contest ended. The crowd got thick, families cheering, kids running around, a bluegrass trio setting up under the gazebo. I turned to help an older couple find the bus pickup point, and by the time I looked back, the woman was gone. I figured she'd left. Then someone started shouting. It came from the north edge of the market, past the vendor rows and picnic tables, near the fire pit where the land sloped into an old dry creek bed. I heard people yelling, a kind of panicked rustle, and I jogged over, weaving through the crowd. When I got there, maybe a dozen people were clustered near the edge of the drop. Some were pointing, others were frozen, like they didn't know what to do. Down in the creek bed, a man was lying on his side, blood along his temple. His eyes were closed, middle-aged, flannel jacket, jeans. Standing just above him, at the very top of the slope, was the woman. She wasn't moving. Someone said she'd shoved him. Someone else swore he slipped. A few people claimed they heard a scream but couldn't tell who it came from. No one had the same story. Someone called for EMTs, I kept glancing between the man and the woman. Then someone touched my shoulder and asked if I could help guide the ambulance to the right gate. I turned to do it, maybe 20 seconds tops. When I looked back, she was gone. Vanished. Not walking away, not blending into the crowd, just gone. I searched for her. I circled the creek bed, checked behind every food truck and porta potty, walked through the parking lot twice. No sign of her. No footprints on the soft edge of the slope. No one else saw her leave. I went back to the volunteer tent, half expecting the mitten to be gone. It was still there. Everything after that felt wrong. The mood shifted. People left early. Vendors packed up without the usual back and forth. I stayed to help clean. Right around 6, the sun started dipping, and I began tying up the trash bags we'd stacked behind the booths. I'd left about 7 or 8 of them by the disposal bins. When I came back 10 minutes later, every bag had been sliced open. Not torn, not chewed, sliced. Each one had a clean, straight cut across the middle. Same height. Trash spilling out like something had unzipped them. I looked around, nothing else disturbed. No bins overturned. No animal prints. And the lost and found table? The mitten was gone. No one claimed it. I asked everyone. Staff hadn't touched it. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about the woman's hands, the way her eyes never met mine. I quit the job that week, moved to Ithaca, found a desk job, spreadsheets, phone calls. No public events, no unexpected noise. I was 29 when I took a weekend job from the Denton Township to clear out leaves from an old property they were trying to fix up. It was a ranger's house, a small place tucked between the edge of town and a trail system that had been closed off for years. The ranger had passed the previous spring, and no one had touched the house since. It was the kind of job they gave to people like me, casual work, under-the-table pay. I'd done a few things for the town before. The guy at the counter handed me a waiver, pointed to the address, and said the key would be taped behind the mailbox. I signed, picked up a steel rake, and tossed my thermos into the passenger seat of my car. That was it. No formal walkthrough, no real directions, just clean up the yard. I pulled up late that morning. The driveway was cracked and half buried under leaves. The mailbox leaned to one side like it wanted to give up, and sure enough, the key was taped to the back, just like they said. The house wasn't much. One story, mostly wooden siding, with faded green shutters and a porch that slouched toward the ground, the kind of place that felt tired. The front door stuck a little when I opened it, but I wasn't planning to go inside anyway. My job was outside. The leaves were everywhere. Some spots were light, others thick enough to cover my boots. Mostly maple, from the way they looked. The trees still had a few left up top, swaying in the breeze. It was chilly, not freezing, but enough that I could see my breath if I stopped moving. I started raking in the back. The yard sloped gently toward a wooded area that marked the beginning of the old trail. It was quiet, no nearby houses, no traffic. Just me, the scrape of the rake, and the occasional squirrel darting along the fence line. After an hour or two, I stopped noticing the time. The kind of work where your brain goes quiet and your hands just keep moving. That changed when I reached this one low spot along the back fence. At first, I thought it was just a patch of softer earth, maybe a garden bed that had been left to die off. But the leaves there weren't behaving like the rest. I'd rake them away, turn around to get another patch, and when I looked back, they'd be there again, not scattered, layered, like I hadn't touched them. I remember standing there holding the rake, just watching the leaves fall. Most of them came in at angles, flipping, skipping, but near that patch, they dropped straight down, like something was drawing them. I walked over and gave the ground a nudge with my boot. It gave a little, like there was something hollow underneath. I crouched down, brushed away the top layer, and noticed something under the soil, a wooden edge, not a log or root. It had clean lines. I grabbed a stick and jabbed down. About a foot in, it thunked against something hard. I started digging with my hands, pushing the soil aside. More of the wood showed. It wasn't debris, it was a square. Smooth surface, faint notches on one side and flush with the ground like it had been sealed that way on purpose. A hatch, but no handle, no hinges I could see, just a square outline, clean and silent. I knocked on it. Hollow. I should have left it. I knew that. But curiosity does weird things when you're alone and no one's watching. I shoved my fingers into the edge and pulled. It stuck at first, but then gave with a crackling sound as the dirt broke loose. When it finally lifted, a cold gust of air rushed out, wet, stale, and sharp, like something had been buried and forgotten down there. I opened it just enough to peek inside. There was no ladder, no structure visible, just blackness. The smell was heavy earth and rot, maybe some kind of wood that had been soaked for too long. It wasn't a basement. It didn't feel like anything designed by a builder, just a hole. And I shut it fast, let the weight drop. The sound was dull, and the dirt puffed out at the edges. I remember stepping back, brushing my hands off, trying to act like it didn't matter. I wasn't getting paid to mess with weird underground spaces. I figured I'd just note it, tell the township, and let someone with better tools deal with it. Maybe it was an old storm shelter or storage pit, not my problem. I went around to the front porch, sat down, and unscrewed the lid of my thermos. The coffee had gone cold, but it gave me something to do with my hands. I pulled out a little notepad from my jacket and started writing down the location of the hatch, how far back it was from the tree line, anything that might help them find it. Then I heard leaves moving. It wasn't a gust. It wasn't swirling. It was directional, slow. And I stood up. The rake was still where I left it, a few feet from the hatch. But there, cutting through the yard, was a thin trail, a line where the leaves had been shifted. Dragged, like something had moved across the surface from the hatch, heading around the side of the house. I followed it, even though everything in me was telling me not to. The trail ended at one of the side windows. The glass was fogged from the inside, like someone had been breathing on it, and in the middle of that fog there was a handprint. It wasn't mine. I hadn't touched any windows, and the house had been locked when I got there. I pulled out my keys to check, or tried to. The house key was gone. I checked my jacket, my jeans, my boots. I retraced every step from the porch to the hatch and back again. Nothing. It wasn't in the grass, not on the driveway, not in the car. I checked the side door of the house. Still locked with a rusty padlock. No sign of forced entry. I pressed my face to the window again, trying to see past the smudges. There was something inside, a table, maybe a chair, nothing moving. I stepped back and looked toward the backyard. The hatch was open again, not fully, just cracked, just wide enough. And the rake, my rake, was lying across the edge of it, like it had been used as a lever, or like something had tried to keep it from closing. I didn't move for a long time. I just stood there holding my breath, staring at the dark line in the grass. Then I picked up the rake, kicked the hatch shut, and dragged a trash bin over it. One of those big ones, with a lid and wheels. I don't know what I thought it would do, keep it shut maybe, or warn someone else. I didn't finish raking. I didn't even collect my notes. I got in the car and drove straight to the municipal building. The woman at the front desk looked confused when I explained. I told her I found something odd, a hatch or crawl space that wasn't listed in any of the property notes. I didn't mention the handprint, or the key, or the fact that it had opened on its own. She said they'd send someone to check it out. A building inspector called me the next morning. His name was Weldon. He asked me where exactly I had found the hatch. I gave him the same directions I'd written down. He paused for a second and said, "We didn't find anything." I asked what he meant. He said the yard looked undisturbed. No hatch, no changes in the ground, no wood under the surface. The window was clean. No smudges, no handprint, no fog. They figured I'd wandered into the wrong spot, maybe past the fence line, maybe down one of the old deer paths. Maybe I saw a root cellar from another property, but I know where I was. I parked in that driveway, I unlocked that door, I raked those leaves. I stood over that hatch. I heard something move. I didn't argue, just said thanks and hung up. I still have the rake. I meant to return it to the township shed, but I never did. It's sitting in my garage right now, leaned against the wall with its teeth bent at weird angles. The same spot where it got warped when I dropped it over that open hatch, like something had pushed up against it from underneath. I haven't been back to that property, haven't even driven past it. I take different jobs now.